Good evening, anarchists everywhere. I'm Ian Bone and welcome to Anarchism in the UK. Today's guest is filmmaker and anarchist Greg Hall. Welcome, Greg.
Hello, thank you.
Okay, let's start off by talking about your feature film, The Plague. How did that come about?
I made my first feature film, The Plague. I was age 22 and I shot it for just $3,500. I'd come fresh out of finishing film school. I was kind of quite depressed about going into the film industry. I'd spent so many years kind of being creative and getting quite politicised that I was really hungry just to make a film that kind of represented me and my friends and the way we grew up, and a lot of things I was into at the time, like hip-hop, and just the way we were living, like friends of mine having a credit card scam, people getting involved in things like dealing. I always felt like, where is our culture? Where is MTV or something like that? The British film industry doesn't show the way British kids are living. So really that was the main drive behind The Plague, and I worked with untrained actors and we shot it for 3 weeks on absolutely no money, no licenses. We kind of broke every law to do it. We edited it. My editor was homeless at the time, sleeping on my floor. We'd cobbled together bits of equipment and we kind of just borrowed, begged and stole anything we could, really. And it ended up getting an award off Mike Leigh and picking up a few awards and doing all the festival circuit in Europe, then getting a British cinematic release and a DVD release. And it's got some really good reviews, so it really helped establish me at quite a young age as an independent filmmaker in Britain.
So how did you blag people to act for nothing then?
A lot of the young guys that I wrote the script with them in mind. I mean, I based a lot of the script on me and my friends, but the young kids in it kind of brought more of an authenticity, like from the estates that they were coming from. So they were just up for doing something. They were so creative and they hadn't really done much drama. My sister used to teach them, a lot of them, at South Thames College, but they were kind of hungry and didn't have any, they weren't up to anything else. They were all kind of unemployed, and so it was everyone just putting their energy into work on something collectively, because they felt also that, where is our story, where is our cinema?
Yeah. And did you adopt the Mike Leigh's way of doing it? Would you just tell him a plot and work around it, or was it all scripted?
No, The Plague was a lot more scripted. As I say, it was kind of based on stories of when I was growing up, and when I was coming to the end of art school I was kind of really depressed and literally just spent a month writing it, and kind of that first draft we then went away and improvised for 2 months around that. So there's a big level of improvisation, but there was a script in place.
And how did you then get it to be shown in all different places? I mean, that must have been pretty difficult.
Yeah, it was really, we were just promoting it. The one thing I say about The Plague is, it came out in 2004, it first premiered, and this was before films like Bullet Boy, Kidulthood, Adulthood. They've kind of, the industry has come to street culture and tried to make something about street culture, whereas The Plague, we came from the point of, we are street culture, the people we're working with. We promoted it through flyering it, things like Kung Fu, a lot of the hip-hop events that were going on, and we just pushed it on the net, really. And having a guy called Skinny Man involved with the film, and I shot his music video which tied in with the film. People have been a massive fan of him for about 15 years, so there's a lot of anticipation about his album. So all kind of tied in nicely, really. And then the Mike Leigh seeing it and giving it the Catherine Cartledge Awards, that it kind of opened it up to the kind of cinema fans, and they really started paying attention.
So how did Mike Leigh come to see it?
We had an industry screening. I was working in a collective back in university, and Mike's son Leo was in the collective, and we'd worked together a lot, and Leo shot it. And when we came to the industry screening, we thought, Leo's dad wanted to come down and see it anyway because he's proud of his son's work. And we thought, it'd be brilliant, the industry screening, Mike Leigh would be there, should impress like all these distributors and journalists. No one really came except Mike Leigh. And he then took me aside and said he wanted to show it to some other people.
And you said, no, Mike, certainly not.
Well, no, I kind of jumped at the opportunity, and he showed it to the other selectors of the Catherine Cartledge Foundation. So obviously his son was involved in it, and he wanted them to look at it, and a lot of them turned around to me, and Catherine was an actress who was in Naked and had died suddenly, and they created a foundation. Right. And some of the patrons are people like Lars von Trier, really big kind of European filmmakers, and people like Mike Leigh and Simon McBurney. and they all saw it and they said, this is the kind of thing Katrin would have loved. You went out and done it. It's political. It's no money. It's independent. And really, that's how the Katrin Cartledge and Mike Lee thing happened.
So what stops other people doing the same thing, going out and just filming like you did on a low budget? Because people want to make films, but often they're stopped by finance.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is actually knowing how to work on no money, knowing the language of cinema and how to use it, how to shoot and get the best things out of working on nothing. I mean, a lot of that comes down to the fact I started making films when I was about 14 on old VHS machines. I'd cobble together any equipment. So I was already starting to learn to just make things for nothing. And I think people just need to stop talking about making films and just make films. I hate people that come up to me and go, oh yeah, I want to make a film. Well, stop standing here in this bar telling me about making a film and make films. That's the most important thing.
So by the time how old were you when The Plague was finished?
It premiered, I was still 22, and then it started picking up awards. I just turned 23, and that was the end of 2004. It kept doing festivals 2005, and then hit the cinemas end of 2006. I was 25 by the end of it, 22 when I started it.
And that led on to your next film was Capital. Can you tell us a bit
it kind
about
of all
that?
crossed over, really. I'd been trying to get another project, and I was approached by a guy called Alex Poots, who had been the selector at the English National Opera, and he'd just taken the job as director of the Manchester International Festival, which the big commission they had was the Monkey Opera by Damon Albarn. And the point of the festival was to commission artists, 10 artists, give them complete creative freedom. So I was co-commissioned with a composer called Steve Martland, and the idea was to work differently. So I had no script, I only had a 6-page outline. I'd taken fairy tales and just stripped them down and worked with actors in Manchester to make them contemporary. And Steve never saw the film, he wrote the score, and then I edited the film to his score. But the amazing thing about the festival was that it was kind of part of the wider gentrification of the city. I mean, you got like kind of Urban Splash and Bruntwood, those companies developing, kind of moving out the locals and putting all these loft apartments and wanting people from London to live there. And the festival was almost set up as part of the gentrification drive, really. So
when the filmmakers move in, the working class moves out.
Well, this was one of the things, this was one of the kind of responsibilities that I had to tackle, really. And I felt because I was given complete creative freedom, I think my film was one of the only pieces in the festival that actually said something about the gentrification and regeneration drive. And even in the film, there's a lovely graffiti that says "Big Brother is regenerating." But I got in a bit of trouble with all the festival people because it was funded by the city council and developers, but it was an opportunity that I had to take, really.
Yeah. So really your sort of politicisation over the last few years was going on at the same time as your filmmaking. How did you sort of first get into sort of radical politics?
Yeah, it's weird. It is very much hand in hand. I mean, my mum and dad, I really kind of take it back to them because my mum's from a very working class background from Fulham. Her mum and dad, you know, my nan was a real Cockney from the Bow Bells, and then granddad was from Fulham. So she was brought up with 3 sisters, toilet outside. My nan used to go clean the posh house in Sloane Square. A real kind of working class background. Then my dad his father was from Scotland and went to join the Palestine police at the only people that would take him at the age of 14, he kept getting sent back from the British Army, but they took him in the Palestine police. And he met my nan, they were Armenian refugees as part of the genocide. So my nan was born in Syria. I met my granddad, and my father was born there, then my mum and dad. So even that background of feeling like, am I British, am I not, but feeling that my mum's very kind of working class, that kind of authentic British lifestyle. So, and then my middle name was Leon because my dad was quite a bohemian in the 60s. So I've always felt the burden of being quite politicised. But I really think at school, I never fit in at school. I was always kind of the shortest kid and I read a lot. Always spent my time in the library, so I never really fitted in. And I think that's always festered in my mind, kind of anti-authoritarian beliefs, and never feeling that I fit in and that I shouldn't have to be made to fit in.
And how does the Armenian background sort of influence you, or how Armenian do you feel? Have you been back to Armenia at all?
We only went 2 years ago for my dad's 60th. It's the first time he'd ever been there. I mean, I'm not a nationalist person at all, but it's just an extra element of me that I'm very proud of being British, and I consider myself British. But there's that other element that I know. I'm not a nationalist person at all, but it's just an extra element of me that I'm very proud of being British, and I consider myself British. But there's that other element that I know parts of my family, they were just drifters. They were, criminalised during a genocide.
Okay, so there's your family background, which is elements of working class politics and bohemianism and so on. What sort of events that were going on in England sort of first brought you into the sort of radical politics?
I mean, the real major thing was when I was at art school. This is down in Farnham in Hampshire, really lovely and leafy, and
I know it well.
Yeah, quite a big student population. So, and we'd created a collective. There was loads of free parties. So there was a real good student scene going on. And really, the anti-war movement was something that politicised us a lot. Myself and another student, Paul Sheeky, who worked on the sound and music for the Plague, we basically...
He worked on the sound and music?
He worked... And we basically helped coordinate 2 street parties where we had minor blockades of Farnham High Street. It was very student-y, and we all went down to London and we did a die-in with some other students and blockaded Downing Street one day. But I kind of didn't get it because I was a bit drunk and everyone was sat down and I was trying to go, let's all get up, and everyone's going, you're going to get nicked for organising. But it was all very, like I say, all very kind of student and art school-y, but just the idea of feeling that we could actually do something that really kind of got us all motivated, and we were making posters, getting people organised, but we faced a lot of apathy from other students, which was the most killing thing. And then also just the way the Stop the War coalition went. It felt like so much could have changed at that time, and everyone was up for it. There was 2 million people out in the streets, but we were all thinking within this box. And even things like the people that had gone up to Fairford and unlawfully turned back, it's almost like the Stop the War coalition has kind of erased that from its history, which is a real shame. Stop the War seemed to be the law of diminishing returns. Start off with 2 million and gradually work your way down to about 10,000. Well, I think for a lot of people that was a pretty disillusioning process with direct action or indirect action and politics. I mean, how did you manage to sort of not be disillusioned by that and retain interest in politics? I mean, really, because at the time when I was leaving college as well, we'd started organising screenings at the London Action Resource Centre as part of our collective, which is LARC, a radical social centre. And really, I was pushing, and from the anti-war stuff, we were kind of connecting with a lot of things in London, but I never really felt that I kind of fitted in within the activist scene, and the main thing was because I make films, so I always thought everyone thought I was part of the evil media, which is kind of the antithesis of really why I actually make films. So I never really fitted into that, and I kind of put all my energy into making films, because to me that was the most political thing, is getting up off my arse and doing it for free and making culture that connects with people and is relevant. There's far more that's actually political. People can sit there and debate, are you just recuperating and selling back to people? Everyone actually does watch films, we listen to music, we consume culture. Not that it will ever change the world, but it can switch people on and start moving things in the right way.
You seem to have managed to sort of make films but not be consumed into the sort of radical activist milieu when you sort of know exactly what the films are going to be like. They're very agitprop-y, they're very worthy, but no one wants to watch them, basically, and they all have a sense of humour bypass. How do you manage to keep out of that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is I've always kept away from kind of being ideologically pure, which I've always found the kind of activist scene to be sometimes. That's not to say there's some really great people doing stuff, do you know what I mean? But really, my approach is, just from doing the Plague, it was mainly about the kids I was growing up with or knew. I wanted to speak to them. I want to just speak to everyday people. I do want my films to reach as many people as possible. That doesn't mean I'm going to water down what I'm going to say. No, I want to connect as anyone should want to. For me, things like anarchism, they're like seeds that we should be spreading as far as possible, because that's where they take fruition.
So you got into sort of radical politics. You've done some film showings at LARC, but how did you specifically get into anarchism? Something you read, some people you met?
I think when I was about 17, I was at school still doing history. And partly because my middle name was Leon, I'd always quite been fascinated by Marxism, socialism. And part of it, we were learning about the Russian Revolution, which I thought was really exciting. But then the other part, we learned about the English Civil War. and specifically it was Christopher Hill's World Turned Upside Down. When I read the quotes from Gerard Winstanley, I was like, wow, this is more. He says more in a sentence than Marx can sum up in a book, and it was knowing that had been around for so long that really kind of switched me more on to anarchism.
And when did you actually meet your first fearsome anarchist? Or where did you meet them?
When I was actually at university still, at film school, in my second year, we had to do a drama documentary, and everyone was doing it, costume dramas, but I decided to make it on the 1-to-1 centre, the old squat in Railton Road. And I started connecting with people in Urban 75. So, I mean, it was very, again, quite studenty, and it was just a story set within that. But I met Fabian Tomset as one of the first, I suppose, official anarchists.
Right.
And then people from 56A Crampton Street got me into a lot of the Spectacular Time stuff. And then Martin Wright as well, and was one of the first people I met at Lark, and Alessio from the Wombles, actually, was one of the first people. But really, meeting yourself, Ian, was kind of been one of the put me very much on the tracks towards anarchism.
And now you've been around, you've seen the anarchist movement and all its warts and all glory, and I know you were at the Anarchist Book Fair last week. I mean, in the present political situation, what opportunities do you think there are for developing the anarchist movement?
I mean, I think now is one of the best opportunities we're probably ever going to see, that a lot of people are really concerned about day-to-day issues, about rising energy, food and house prices. And I think if anarchists we can get away from this ghettoization of what it is to be an anarchist, and really just everyday people starting to see that they can organise their own communities. And it really comes down to a local issues and dealing with them, and organising communities, organising themselves and not having to wait around. And people are now feeling that they've lost that trust in the system of government, and really we should get our ideas out amongst everyday working class people, because to me anarchism is just common sense. Most people I meet, probably most people that I learnt about anarchism is just through day-to-day people that don't call themselves anarchists. It's just people that are anti-authoritarian, see that the politicians aren't out for them. Why would they be out for them? It's common sense. So I think it's a big time, and we really have to be pushing and organising and try and move things forward.
I was amazed with the financial crisis last week, the lack of action from anarchists or anyone else in the city. One of the problems over the last few years has been that the police seem to have got everything sewn up. It's extremely difficult to demonstrate anywhere in the City of London without being kettled in by the police, forced into a corner. I mean, can you see a way around that? Any ideas how sort of mobilisations on the street can come back into vogue again? Yeah,
I mean, it's really about the amount of people, I do think, at some point. I mean, the past few actions, even things like May the 2nd, and I used to go to the old May days after the big ones, unfortunately, and I just got fed up from being kettled in, and it has become a real nuisance. I think either people need to keep on their feet in small numbers and keep moving. There seems to be in British anarchism, we just kind of stand around and let the police circle us, but I think it really does come down to numbers. Until any big street actions can happen, we need to build up a network and get people out on the streets, because if there's more people than there are police, then they can't kettle us in.
You're part of this sort of movement across London to set up local anarchist groups across London. I think specifically you're involved with the Whitechapel anarchist group and trying to start that up. Could you tell us a bit about the Whitechapel scene? Yeah,
Whitechapel is a handful of us have just kind of organised to get a group together. We've been publicising it for a past month, putting out a free sheet and also doing a cinema night. I mean, Whitechapel is steeped in anarchist history, from Sydney Street to the Jubilee Club, to Cable Street. There's so much there, and we've also quite established anyway. We've got Lark, there's Freedom Press, there's Ramparts. There's a lot of people around that area. I mean, the divides between the new kind of housing coming in, the loft apartments, and the divide between rich and poor is so obvious to the eye just to walk around. It seems like we need a anarchist group in Whitechapel, and things that we're hoping to set up are like a local paper, keep doing social events, hopefully get more people in at Freedom now that they've moved their bookshop downstairs. Any other local campaigns, anything to do with stopping evictions, any pubs that are getting closed down. Really, we want to build up enough of us that if anything's happening, we can just spring into action and help defend our local communities. Really, because no one else is going to.
I was impressed that the Whitechapel anarchist newspaper, which I think you designed, was actually a brilliant design. It looked good. The trouble with a lot of anarchist publications, they look boring, they're dog-eared, not exciting. But I think you see, both in terms of your film and in the graphic design for papers, you see design as being pretty important. I mean, I think so as well. I mean, how do you see that going forward?
Yeah, I mean, really, we kind of have to speak to everyday people, and you just need to like look at the kind of political propaganda. Even like the London Mayor thing, you look at like the Left List and the BNP, and it's like they're both trying to go for kind of populist things but getting it really wrong. And I think we need to break out of just because something's printed on a photocopy that's our anarchist propaganda. We should look at the tools that all the political parties use, all the media uses, and we should take those tools. For me, it was filmmaking, the cameras, the equipment, it's all there now. Even things like graphic design, things like Photoshop, you can rip them off the internet. We should start using these tools for our benefit. And it's like when the printing presses first, exploded. It was the amount of information that was getting out there. Now we do have technology and tools, and we should really use them and fight the advertisers and the politicians at their own game, really.
And I think you've been involved with quite a few of the London graffiti artists as well, haven't you?
Well, just through kind of hip-hop and stuff like that, there's a lot going on. One of the things that kind of really inspired me more than reading things like, say, Bakunin or Proudhon, or trying to read them and trying to understand them, is like hip-hop. That was the one thing that, it's a ghetto culture, it's not ideologically pure, it's not wholly anarchist, but there's a lot in there that's anti-authoritarian, that's working class and proud. And things like graffiti, where hip-hop came from, about bringing the communities together in a positive way, like African Bambata joining the gangs up. That hip-hop was it's a real kind of socialist and collectivist and creative movement, but it's a shame it's kind of been co-opted and sold back to us as rap, with these like 50 Cent kind of misogynist, the real antithesis of anything that hip-hop ever was. And that has been one of the main drives in inspiring me. That's why I made my films on no money, because all the hip-hop guys in London, they were doing it themselves. People like Jest, Task Force, Brain Tax, Skinny Man. There's a whole scene there, and they really inspired me to just, what am I waiting around for? Why am I waiting for the industry? We would just and guys like that, they've got an audience. They can press a record, put out 500 copies, and that's enough for them. They support each other. It's like, I suppose, what punk was, but maybe a bit more organised. And they've got more design skills nowadays.
Yeah. Well, basically, it is a bit like punk DIY culture, that people can put a film out, can put music out sort of instantly and cheaply, which you've never been able to do before. I mean, you're like Renaissance man, Greg, with an interest in 101 different films to music. I think too many anarchists are just one-dimensional. They just come across as boringly political in the most narrow sense, and not like well-rounded human beings. They're just like train spotters. I mean, you think, how have you managed to avoid... I
am a train spotter though, but I love hip-hop, I love films, I love books, I am a real geek. But anarchism always has meant to me, because I've read a lot, it's not been, I just like Marxism, I just believe in this ideology. I've never wanted to be ideologically pure. I've read religious books, occultist books, fiction, and I take from them what I want, and to me that's anarchism. I pick and choose. I shouldn't feel constrained. So I've always felt, with even things like hip-hop, it's not purely anarchist. There's things that are homophobic, that are racist, but with hip-hop it's like it all gets chucked in, and everyone just appreciates that it is open to talk about these things. And that's what I'm more into, not anything that's ideologically pure. And like, say, with the anarchist or activist, if you eat the wrong chocolate bar, you wear the wrong trainers, you'll get kicked out, because you're not then talking to 95% of the population.
Yep, Green and Black's chocolate used to be all right, but it's got taken over by Nestle, so you can't eat it anymore. Which of sort of current filmmakers would you think are worth looking at?
Definitely, I have to give a big plug for Lech Kowalski. I met him in 2005 in the Human Rights Film Festival in Zagreb, and the guy's just a legend, man. Silver-haired, just wears a black jacket. He started making films back in the 70s. He was funded by the mob and he used to make porn, but the mob used to turn around and say these porns are so arty that people can't even, I was about to say, can't even toss off to them. And then he went on, his first film was DOA, about the Sex Pistols arriving in America, called Dead on Arrival, which is a real critique of kind of punk and just that kind of culture being really sold out. And he's always made a lot of films, Hitler's Highway and Easter Paradise, about his mum in the from Poland and in the concentration camps, and just all the kind of radical stuff about the 70s and gentrification in New York. And he's got a project now called CameraWar.tv, and he's uploading 3 films every Monday. They're 3 documentaries, and you can watch them. It's building up a body of work which you can either watch in order, you can watch bits and pieces there. And he's just out in America charting what's going on now. And there's one short called President Bush, which is about people demonstrating at Wall Street. It starts off with just a die-in with 4 people with signs saying class war crimes, and it just builds and builds, and it's all normal everyday people. There's a Vietnam vet there, there's people with jump now signs, and it's incredible seeing that that's happening in America now. That was like a week or so ago. So Lex really at the front of kind of using the digital technology and using documentary to take back news and tell our own vision of how we want the world to play out.
Okay, let's move on to your latest project, which I believe is an adaptation of Ian Bohn's, oh, that's me, book Bash the Rich. Can you tell us what attracted you to the book to turn it into a film?
Yeah, I mean, I first read it, it was a few years back. I bought it at the book fair, and I think I did actually buy it off you, but we were trying to work that out. I'm not sure.
I'm sure I wasn't touting my own book.
Yeah. And I mean, I'd always written my own stuff, but I've always waited for a book, and I've always been really heavily inspired by books, but never thought, adapting a book is not what I'm really into. I take inspiration from them. But then when I read your book, I was like, finally, here is someone writing something that I can get my teeth into. And it just felt really relevant. And some of the stuff you were saying about Grosvenor Square and the anti-war movement, I felt that resonated with myself and a whole generation with the kind of anti-war movement here, with the Iraq War. And it felt like the amount of British history it was covering, even from the general strike in 1926 to the miners' strikes.
I'm not that old.
Well, I know, from your granddad. But through to like the miners' strikes, the race riots, everything that was going on up to the poll tax riots. It just feels like there's a bit of British history that kids nowadays don't know. They don't even know who Thatcher is, and we're now living in kind of the aftermath of that period of time. And I think it's very important that, especially now, we do look back on that history. And that's not to say we can just dwell on it and do nothing about now. The reason I want to make Basha Rich is it is a comedy, it is entertainment, and hopefully it will give people a few ideas and see that there is hope for the future, that people have always been doing stuff in the past, and that Britain is actually such a radical country with such a radical history that it fits in, I think, within that kind of radical history.
And what's the current state of play with the film? Where are we at?
We're halfway through the first draft. I spent a year meeting with everyone and researching it, kind of getting all the skeletons out of the closet. And it's been a fascinating year. I've met so many people and it's been very inspiring. And it's just taken a year to kind of break it all down. But as you've read the first half of the draft, we're getting there.
I can say in complete objectivity, it's a magnificent screenplay of a magnificent book. But more to the point, who's playing me in the film?
I can't really say that on radio. We're hoping to get an actor on board who I have in mind. So we're
Dennis Hopper, Christopher Walken, Robert De Niro. Are these the names that you're toying with?
They're the 3. They're up in the air at the moment. I'm juggling between the 3.
And if people want to get hold of the copy of The Plague, how
the Plague's on Amazon, but the distribution company's gone bust actually. But there are still a few copies. I might be knocking out a pirate myself. But I should say I am making a new film in the new year, just because I've been waiting around for funding. So I've kind of put a lot behind me with The Plague and Kapital. Moving on, I'm going to get Bash the Rich in for funding once the script's finished, but I've been going around the houses for about a year trying to get another project funded, and I'm fed up, kind of shelved that. I'm writing something new with the young lads from The Plague and from Capital. I'm going to shoot my 3rd feature for absolutely no money, and I'm going to try and put it out myself, and it's called SSDD, which means same shit, different day. It's a very contemporary piece about life in Britain.
Okay, well, that's the DIY film message from Greg Hall, anarchist filmmaker extraordinaire. Thanks a lot, Greg. That was brilliant. Okay, that's all for this week. See you all next week.